Okay, why does it seem like there's something in the way here? Is there like oh wait, no camera? What just happened? Well, how's the sound? Oh, here we go. All right, that's all right. I can see myself now. What in the world is going on? Sound okay? Okay, good, good. Because this is the first time. This is my brand new laptop. Cost me $750 from Hewlett Packard. It was one of the Cyber Monday sales. It was after Thanksgiving, and so far it's doing pretty good. It's a Windows 11 computer, so I'm a little bit confused by some of the ways that it interacts with OneDrive, and I'm a little bit worried about how it's going to do with video because it's got integrated graphics instead of its own separate graphics card. So, let me know what you see. Let me know what you hear. If anything's weird or looks wrong or what have you, maybe there's something that I can do about it. But at some point, I do have a microphone that I can set up, and it's USB, and I can plug it into this thing. But I haven't even I haven't taken that out of the box yet. I figure I'd just go ahead and do one with just the built-in microphone for now and see if it sounds any better. I know the other one had a problem with being tinny, and I also know that my previous laptop ran pretty loud. This one is quiet. This one is supremely quiet. I have not. I'm impressed with uh, how quiet this machine is. I don't think I've heard it over a whisper, and when it does, it's kind of like, wow, I must really be using the processing power on it because now it's gone from an absolute zero to I don't know if you can even hear that, but neither can I barely. So yeah, there's this is a heck of a machine for $750. I just hope that it's able to do StreamYard stuff, which I'll see about getting on with BTM reviews one day this week or something just to see what they think of the sound, what they think of the imagery. Do I still need to get the mic hooked up, or is this built-in one going to do? I don't know what happened at the start there though, because for some reason it seemed like it was there was a blockage of some sort that was in the way of the camera, and I guess I managed to get rid of it somehow. But we'll see. Hopefully, it's not going to go out on me again. Let's see. Anything in recent news? I did see a couple of movies. Both of them kind of sucked. One of them I didn't expect to be good. The other one I did, and I was really surprised. Alien Romulus. Anyone see that one? Holy crap, that was bad. I couldn't even watch it. And I was able to watch Alien or Prometheus and Alien Covenant, but Romulus, no. Wow, that was just a bad movie. Um, what was the other one? Oh yeah, this is going to shock you. Deadpool and Wolverine. Deadpool and Wolverine. I could not stand that movie. I mean, it was a waste of time on so many levels. I love the first two. I mean, I love the first one absolutely. The second one, I think I enjoyed that one too. But Deadpool and Wolverine, I'm like, okay, I've got the general gist of what this movie is about, and now it's just going to be a waste of time, convoluted waste of time. Okay, now I'm about to sneeze. Okay, there went the instinct. Um, yeah, Student of God says it sucked. I agree. I was just there was nothing to that movie that I really enjoyed. And it's weird because everybody's got different kinds of tastes. I mean, like the very first scene where he's dancing to Bye 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 and attacking all of those guys and whatnot. I just thought that was okay, but it was just taking up time, getting you through the credits. That was pretty much it. Um, and then so many things. I think the main problem that I have with the Deadpool and Wolverine movie is that because both of them have healing factors, and they can carve each other up, stab each other up, do whatever they want to each other, and it's not going to mean anything. And if it's not going to mean anything, then Why even do it? It's just a waste of time. So yeah, that movie was pretty much just a waste of time. Um, Anything else going on? No, I don't think so. And I don't want to beat around the bush too much. I want to wait a little bit so I'd get a few more people in here. But I'm a little bit on the tired side today, and I don't know. I'm already breaking out the caffeine water. Uh, I consume Mio by the pound now. I really like. Let's see, what is that? Brian Suddenly Old. Still haven't seen Deadpool 3. Yeah, yeah. Well, I hope you have a better time than I did because just I didn't care for it at all. Let's see here. Oh yeah, I was talking about Mio. Yeah, I've been consuming this stuff by the pound because I went on the keto diet and I'm trying to go like no carbs. And so, one of the things to getting away from sodas, I've gone to, using just water that's been laced up with either caffeine or electrolytes. You're supposed to get electrolytes when you're on the keto diet. And oh god, who's buzzing me now? I have no idea what that was. Um, and then on the keto diet, you're supposed to have a lot of electrolytes because you're not getting that from the vegetables that you would have otherwise been consuming, or from the carbohydrates or something like that. So that may be actually more appropriate to the carnivore diet because you don't have the vegetables, but in keto, vegetables are okay. Um, LMAE says my mom is on a similar diet. Well, I hope she's having better results than I am because so far I don't know if I've lost weight or not. Because I didn't really check myself at the beginning of my diet, but I'm hoping I did. No carbs is too hard. I use my blood sugar sensor to check my carb intake. I would have thought no carbs would be too hard because God, I love, hash browns, French fries, and all these other things. But honestly, once you figure out what it is you have to avoid, it's not really that bad. And you're supposed to keep yourself to like 50 carbs or less a day, or 50 grams of carbohydrates or less a day. Um, and I'm okay with it. Now, of course, I broke my I went out with some friends over to Fuzzy's Tacos, and I had the cilantro lime rice with my taco, and I had like two beers. So I was like, I bet this is not keto beer. So I broke my diet pretty hard that day, and then the next day they had a retirement party for this guy. So I went and I had some cake. I was like, yeah, I had beer yesterday. I'll have cake today. That's going to be my cheat for who knows, the next few months. And but other than that, I've just been sticking to just straight up meat, cheese, veggies, what have you, and it's fine. I mean, there's still a lot you can do with just that. You don't get too terribly bored with the food choices, and you do a lot of cooking at home, which I don't mind in the slightest. Uh, so as far as the diet goes, it's going okay. I mean, I don't feel like I'm drained of energy. And there actually were some times when I felt like I wasn't quite as hungry anymore, which I think is supposed to be a good sign. I don't know if I've ever actually gotten into ketosis. I felt some cramps happening sometimes, which is supposed to be a sign that you're going into it. But they come and they go, and I try and drink the electrolyte water in order to get rid of the cramps. Uh, I'm sorry, Brian Suddenly Old says, Mike, if you're looking for a superhero comic to try, check out Alpha Red. It's a James Bond meets Bible Man, but in a good way. It's campy, all ages fun. Alpha Red. I'll have to look that one up. Yeah, I've actually got. Well, I've still got Dino King, of course. That one is next on my list. I just got in. I can't reach it from here, but I just got in Kyle Ritter's Starblades. Now, Ethan Van Sciver was having a sale a few days ago, and one of the things that he was doing was putting up some copy of Kyle Ritter's Starblades, and I realized that's a little bit pricey. I can get a cheaper copy on eBay, and then I realized I better get the cheaper copy on eBay because otherwise somebody else is going to. So for about $20, I was able to get a copy when Ethan was selling them for about 50 or 60. And I'm like, oh, okay, let's check this one out. But I haven't read it yet, so that's another one that will be off in the near future. I think probably after Dino King, or maybe after I know Bloodroot is going to start fulfilling in February. They ended the campaign down, and thank you once again to everyone who donated to the Bloodroot #1 fund. I want to remind everyone. Zade Comics says hello, Mike. Hello. I want to remind everyone that I am now taking collections for YAIRA #2. Don't really want to read that one, but if you think, oh goodness, if you think that it would be useful to see the Soska sisters' second attempt at a YAIRA comic book be critiqued by me, then by all means, I'm looking for $50 to get that going. $50 for 2 copies of YAIRA #2. One I'm going to cannibalize for scans, of course. The other one will be my reading copy. Let's see. Brian Suddenly Old says Dino King is okay, weak compared to other manga out there. Starblades is really weak, but the art is fantastic. Yeah, I wanted to check the art on that. I'm not exactly sure who does it. Is it Kyle Ritter who does the art on all of that? Well, I'll find out whenever I open the book. There's going to be credits in there. I will see. But yeah, those are a couple. I was glad I was able to get a cheap copy of that. The one thing that I'm kind of looking for right now is the Jawbreaker series. I would really like to see. I don't know how many of those books actually came out there. Brian Suddenly Old says Kyle did everything but the letters. I would really like to see like a Jawbreakers collection done someday that collects like the 3 or 4 volumes or maybe 5 volumes that Richard C. Meyer and John Malin had done back in the day. So I know there's a few of them out there, and the first one was a little bit on the pricey side. So I was like, I think I'm just gonna wait for a reprint. And besides, it's so old now that I almost feel like if I go back and I critique that, then I'm just basically kicking someone for their earlier work. And but the thing is, it's an interesting concept, and because it was like the first of the Comicsgate titles to actually break ground as far as I understand Comicsgate history, it would be interesting to see it, especially in light of the fact that I still have not received anything from John Malin yet in terms of Graveyard Shift or Godlike. I just got in on those campaigns, and I know his Second Chance campaign for Graveyard Shift Volume 5 is running now. So I did pick up Volume 5 and the source book. Did I do that? Did I do that? I don't. Ooh, I better go back and check. I may not have actually ordered that yet. Okay, so that's something I'm going to have to check on is whether I ordered, or I may have just said that I'm just going to get. I may have decided just to get the Graveyard Shift #5 and skip the source book because, for one thing, it just. Oh no, I remember what happened now. I remember what happened. No, I actually paid a super chat because I told John that there was no tier that included just the Graveyard Shift Volume 5 and the source book. And those were the 2 new items. And it's like, why do I have to make 2 separate purchases on your campaign? Can you not just put, those 2 together in a tier? I swear to God, I don't understand. I don't understand why it is so hard for some people to figure out, okay, what are the tiers I should put together? Because I saw all kinds of varieties of tiers for this Graveyard Shift Volume 5, and a few of them made sense because it was like, here's your catch-up pack, here's everything that you need in order to get the entire Graveyard Shift story. And then here's one where it's got source book 1, 2, 3. It's like only the source books or the supplemental books, only those. Why would you sell only those? And then there was another one where it was just the 1, 2, 3, but it was 1, 2, 3, 4 plus Volume 5 and the new source. There's some stuff on there that just doesn't make any sense to me in terms of I cannot imagine having bought only this combination of things so that I need this other weird combination of things in order to make my collection complete. It's like at that point, you may as well just either sell everything individually or you sell the big packages, and then people can just lament or try and sell the extra stuff whenever they get their overshipments, if you want to call it. Real Nerdy Review says, Mike, nerdy, I'm on my new laptop finally. Zade Comics says John doesn't do add-ons, make the tiers the way they need to be. But yeah, I mean, I definitely see where add-ons probably can be stressful in terms of trying to put all the different combinations together that could possibly be there. But if you do it right, I mean, there's probably ways you could do it right. Zaid Comics says I wrote the uh, Graveyard Shift Supplemental number 3. Hope you get a chance to read it. Was fun to work on. Well, cool, cool. Yeah, I'm hoping I like Graveyard Shift. I'd hate to. It's sad sometimes when I look back at some of the stuff for Comicsgate that I've reviewed, and of course, everyone wants. Of course, everyone in Comicsgate wants to say it's like we're putting out the best things. We've got all the best things. It's like, do you really though? Do you? And we'll see. I'm hoping that one of these days, I'm hoping somebody drops that 10 out of a 10 comic in my lap, and that it's a Comicsgate one. But you never know. It could end up being a Rippaverse one. It could end up being somebody entirely independent. Don't even realize it's going to be that person. So we'll see one of these days. Speaking of Rippaverse, we now have a spokesperson who is the new public facing representative of Rippaverse, who is Gothix. I'm sure everybody's probably seen a video or two about her and in doing her live streams, talking about her new position in Rippaverse as a spokesperson for them. Now, I think she's been undeservedly getting a lot of crap from people. I have to say that up front, because when you are a spokesperson for a company, that does not necessarily mean you have to know everything about the ins and outs of the company. If you go to a lawnmower company, you may not know anything about lawnmowers, but you can read a press release. You can handle press questions. You can handle the customer feedback and things like that. Generally, you will learn as you go about the products that the company delivers, and then you will be able to speak more intelligently on those things. But there's nothing that says that knowing the business that you are going to be a spokesperson for in and out and every which way is going to be a requirement of the job. And so we just need to kind of hold back and just see how she does the job. Now, I haven't seen her do anything for Rippaverse so far, and maybe that's because I'm not really following anything except the Rippaverse channel, and she hasn't gotten anything to do on that yet. But I would just say give her a break and let her come in, get herself acclimated, and we'll see what happens there. Brian Suddenly Old says Graveyard Shift really benefits from the supplementals. If you just read the main books, it's really weak and feels hollow. Well, I'll have to see on that. I know when I read the Inglorious Rex supplementals, I was not terribly. I didn't feel like they were adding a whole lot to those. I mean, I know there's one of them that adds to the backstory of the girlfriend, and I don't think I even bothered to review the supplementals for Inglorious Rex number 1. Maybe I should do a separate video on that, because I did a Inglorious Rex number 1, but I didn't do the Inglorious Rex supplementals for number 1. And maybe I should. I don't know. I'll reread it and see if there's anything that I think is actually worth commenting on from those. Probably not. It's just from what I remember. And then I think I like the supplementals more from Inglorious Rex 2. But that's when I get Inglorious Rex 3 in, that's kind of what I'm waiting for. That's when I'm going to review 2. And the reason being is because 2 drops off directly into a cliffhanger leading into 3. And there's really no sense just trying to do 2 by itself. And then we'll see. Low watermark, $10. Thank you so much. That is going to go straight into the fund for YAIRA number 2. Want to remind everybody, YAIRA number 2 is what I am collecting for. And that is a $50 mark. We are now at we've got $10 towards the $50 I need to purchase YAIRA number 2. Low Watermark says, but maybe she could know 1 or 2 things about the company. I think she was hired to be a spokesmodel. And again, perfectly fair if that's what she was hired to be. And she does know 1 or 2 things about the company. Low Watermark says YAIRA is definitely a number 2. That's right. And it's floating in the ocean this time, if I understand the plot correctly. Quantum Age Comics says, hey, what up, Zaid? Comics Hex Allen here. Um, let's see, what was I saying about that? Oh yeah. She does know a couple of things. The problem is that what she knows, she's been fed by Eric, which again is understandable. He's the boss, and he's going to put forward the picture of the company that he wants not just her but the whole world to see. And so we're going to be seeing it through the lens of Eric July. And what I wanted to try and do today, because I don't know how long it's been since anyone's attempted to do this. Is just kind of go over the beginnings of the Rippaverse and how it felt for an observer like me to get your hopes up over a comic book universe and then experience the disappointment of the actual product that they deliver, because this is what Gothix is not going to be able to connect with in any way, shape, or form if she's just listening to what Eric says about the company and why everybody is attacking him. Because there's going to be the standard stuff of nobody wants to see a black man succeed, yada yada. There's stuff about oh, they're trying to gatekeep you because they don't think you paid your dues and yada yada. And there's so many things that he's going to be feeding her with, that if she wants to get another perspective, I'm hoping that this video is something that she might be able to come to and see another person's perspective on it. And I want it to be a true perspective too. I don't want to just parrot lines, as if Ethan Van Sciver were feeding me his point of view. I mean, I will include some of his point of view in there, and also talking about Dick Masterson and some of those. But I'm not going to take their sides necessarily, because I have a side throughout all this myself. June Wong says, disagree. A spokesperson should know everything about the company, or else the spokesperson might say something that makes the company look bad. I can't see how that's possible, though. I mean, when you first get on the job, there is no way you're going to know everything about the company. You have to be fed that information, and you can absorb the information as you are fed it. And you can tell she's already got, some of the comic books on her desk, so she's going to be reading those, and she's going to know about the product soon enough. But the day after she gets hired, she's not going to know everything there is to know. Zaid Comics says, hey, Hex. Brian Suddenly Old says, I just wish she read the comics before stepping into the role. Well, it does take a little bit of time sometimes for people to even get used to reading comics. Reading comics, I mean, it shouldn't really take much skill to do that, but for some people, the combination of words and pictures is not what they're used to. And a lot of people are more used to audiobooks these days, and so they don't even bother to read. Yeah, so putting the words and pictures together, knowing how you're supposed to follow them around the page, sometimes, especially when you're dealing with comic books that don't always follow the rules about where all these things are supposed to go, and who don't always have the right, syntax, or have the right emphasis in the right places, it can make it difficult for a newcomer to understand. So, yeah, it'll take a little bit of a learning curve, I'm sure. Quantum Age Comics, if she read the comics, she would have declined the position. Well, I mean, it's possible, but I mean, think about the people out there who are reading the comics and actually enjoying them, and you wonder why. And it's like, have you never read any other comics that you think that these are the best ones that you could find? Um, I can imagine that that's actually the case for some people, is that they're going to be looking at those particular comics and they're like, well, I've never read comics before, but these sure seem great to me. I mean, the art's crisp, and I can tell what's going on from the story, and yeah, I don't see anything wrong with this. But when you've read comic books for like 45 years, like I have, and you know what some of the ins and outs are of putting these things together, and also what some of just basic storytelling tactics are, and you're not seeing them utilized, or you're seeing rules contradicted. And it's not, and like I said, it's not something that's just germane to Rippaverse. This is something that happens on the Comicsgate side too. It's like, oh well, rules, we don't need rules. Sometimes you do. So yeah, I don't see how she's going to acquire that kind of critical nature towards the comics, especially if she's just not a comic book reader. And as she grows into the role, and assuming she stays with it, because you never know, she might decide, screw this, I've got my own stuff to do. She might either realize that the product's actually not up to snuff and not feel like lying about it, or she can, maybe she'll develop an appreciation for the books, or maybe she'll at least say, well, he's trying. Because one of the things I noticed about what she was trying to say um, during her kind of introductory remarks is that, well, he's trying to do something, and then there are the people who, they can't do it, so they just basically criticize and try and tear down everything that somebody else is doing. And it's like, yeah, but you don't understand. The reason that a lot of us chose to tear down and deconstruct and point out the flaws in the stuff that he was doing is so that he could do it better. And when we found out that our advice was not getting heeded, that's when we started getting pissed off. Because then we were like, okay, so we're supposed to stick with him, but he's not accepting any feedback from us. I mean, and we don't know of anyone he is accepting feedback from except the people he's paying to write his books. And so, yeah, maybe he'll accept feedback from them. And it's not always good feedback. I remember he was talking about how Chuck Dixon gave him some feedback for ISOM #1, and when I heard what the feedback was, I was like, no, don't implement that. You don't need that. Uh, okay, so a true history. I almost said true when I was making the title for this thing. I almost wanted to say a true-ish history of the Rippaverse, because I know I'm going to get some things wrong, but I'm definitely going to try to keep the facts as accurate as possible. And I remember, I started watching Ethan Van Sciver's Comics Gate, and finding out more about independent comics, finding out about Cyberfrog and all these things, and then all of a sudden, Rippaverse comes along, and I don't know if it was probably through a Bleeding Cool article or something that was talking about how the company is starting up, or if it was through Ethan's broadcast. I want to say he had Eric July on one of his programs in the early days, and we got to learn about this new comic book company that was starting up that was going to have several titles, and it was going to have several different characters. The first character, ISOM, was going to be the launch pad for all of these other characters, including ALPHACORE and YAIRA, and then who knows what else. And that was an exciting thing. It was exciting because most of the independent comic book creators out there are putting together a title. Shane Davis is doing Inglorious Rex, and at some point he might do Starlight Cats, but I don't think the two occupy necessarily the same universe. Ethan Van Sciver's got Cyberfrog. He's going to have some other properties in the Cyberfrog universe, but he's also working on the Rainbow the Brute, which doesn't intersect with that. And he's also got Fearsome that doesn't intersect with that. A lot of comic book creators out there are creating these one-off type properties where the properties don't intersect with one another. They don't form a universe. And there are a lot of people like me who get excited about the idea of a comic book universe. When you have a comic book universe and you have all these different characters who are going to be interacting together and building a history together, and especially in Eric July's presentation of it, where he's saying this is what is lacking from the comic book industry now, is that they're constantly rewriting their own histories. Their characters don't mesh together in any recognizable form. You see contradictions all the time. They don't respect the fans. They don't respect the lore. We're going to do all that. And so when you had somebody like Eric July, who'd made a name for himself in critiquing all of these comics that had been out there, all of these movies that had been out there, all these different comic book properties, and he was going to bring us the kinds of comics and a comic book universe like what we had been longing for a long time. That was exciting. I mean, it was something, and to see him going on all of these different shows. He was on Fox News. He was on the Glenn Beck's program. Of course, he'd already been associated with Glenn Beck at the time, and I think he still is in some degree. But you had him making the rounds and getting all this popularity, and it was all this great big spirit of community that was springing up around the Rippaverse, and we had really, really high hopes for it. We at least hoped that there was going to be a basic level of competence displayed in the book, because here was a guy who had, after all, spent all of this time critiquing comics. Surely, the same level of critique would be leveled upon his own comic when he brought it out into the marketplace. So there was a lot of hype, a lot of understand. I mean, he built his own website for it, and then the whole crowd. Well, it wasn't a crowdfunding thing; it was a pre-order campaign. Understandably, he funded the project with about $200,000 to $300,000 of his own money, and started this business, hired employees, got the thing going, and when everything was said and done, there were $3.7 million on the table. $3.7 million, which was higher than anybody had managed to raise before for a single comic book. And it was like the crowd went wild. And we were just like, wow. And hopefully this is going to be really, really good stuff. What do we got here? Brian Suddenly Old says Ethan was promoting the Rippaverse quite a lot, ramping up to book one. Yeah, and understandably so. I mean, it was, with all of the popularity, there was a real chance of riding on the Rippaverse's coattails and getting more exposure for your own comic. Now, that turned out to be something that Eric did not really necessarily reciprocate with. And that was part of the problem and part of the rift that developed between Eric and the other and the not other comic skaters, but Eric and the comic skaters, is the fact that Eric would come on their shows and he'd get to promote his stuff on their shows. But when it came time to be like, hey, can you return the favor? His attitude was more something along the lines of, well, you're my competition. Why would I do that? And so that is the story from Ethan Van Sciver, talking about this. This is one of the reasons why a rift started developing between them. Then the book came out, and we had ISOM #1 in our hot little hands. Yeah. Let's see. Back Xavier says, yeah, well, it's too bad Eric can't tell a good story. And Dan Elvin says, I was so excited after seeing Eric on Fox that I was trying to figure out how I was going to afford $35 cover price comic books. Yeah, that was one of the things too, that, God, I'm glad y'all are here, because you're bringing in all these details that really did need to be covered. Because one of the things that was kind of phenomenal about the Rippaverse comics at the time is how much they cost. You were paying $35 for a single comic, and most people by that time, I think, in the comic skate sphere, were charging about $20 or $25 for their comics. And everybody kind of chafed a little at the fact that the price on the book was so high. But he was basically saying, well, if this is what the market will bear, then I'm going to go ahead and charge it. Which I can't argue with the business sense of that. I just, there might have been a little bit of maybe ill will generated with customers who felt like they were getting a bit ripped off in terms of price compared to what they were paying at the other places. But again, I think a lot of people were willing to pay that because this was such an ambitious venture, and it was such an ambitious venture that a lot of us wanted to see succeed. And because one of the things about a comic book universe is that you're not just necessarily stuck with one title. The universe effect, which I've talked about a lot on my previous videos, is kind of like the rising tide lifts all boats. If somebody likes one of the comics, just even one of the comics, that's going to help the other ones sell as well. And it also gives you the opportunity to experience that universe in different ways through the eyes of different characters. One of the companies that I miss terribly is CrossGen, which had a meta story on top of its 4 initial comic books. And because all 4 of those comic books were involved in this giant meta story involving the sigils and the sigil bearers, that I wanted to get everything that came out from that universe, because I didn't want to miss a single important detail. Now, unfortunately, things kind of unraveled for CrossGen when they started becoming more of a genre thing than a meta story driven thing. I know Chuck Dixon says really what they should have done was abandon the meta story and just go and become a genre publisher. Here's our genre book for this. Here's our genre book with pirates. Here's our genre book with you know karate action. Here's our genre book with Vikings. And you could just do all of these different genre books. And that may have been a smart strategy, and I think they were on their way towards that. It's just that the finances had already broken down too much by the time CrossGen got around to publishing Negation War, which would have wrapped up the meta story. So you had what I'm basically saying is, I think that there are a lot of fans out there like me who have an affinity for universes because we like to have large, broad, sweeping stories from a wide variety of authors, from a wide variety of of styles that all interweave, and where the characters relate to each other, so that you have to get all of these titles so that you know what's going on. And so the Rippaverse was a very ambitious endeavor that we felt just could justify the high price that we were paying, because just one copy is going to run you like $50 all total, because you're going to be paying $35 plus tax plus shipping, and now you've got $50 on your hands right there. So we got the book, and let me just what else we got here? Also, the Brian Suddenly Old, or wait, Quantum Age comic. I feel for you all. My comic is a much better value. That's Quantum Age Comics. Look him up. Brian Suddenly Old says also the limited collectibles that keep popping up and don't seem that limited now. Yeah, there was that idea that some of these covers were going to be limited. But I mean, they're not going to do new printings of those, as I understand it. So they are still limited to that degree. The court says, yeah, but then he turned around and had a $5 sale on that $35 book. Yeah, well, there that was the liquidation. I understand, but yeah, I didn't have too much of a problem with that, just because the only reason I had a little bit of a problem with that is because I went and I bought the ISOM cover D, or not cover D, not cover D was the special one for the subscription members. I bought a copy of ISOM cover C because I needed it for scans, and I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks later that he had the $5 sale. And so I kind of got burned on that, but I needed it when I needed it. So, sometimes that's just the price of doing business. So we got the books. We got the books in hand. And from the first damn page, when you open the book and you get to the first title page, it's like already there are problems. And it's not like things just went completely off the rails, but you started to see signs that maybe you were not going to get your value out of this book, because the first page was essentially blank. And by that, I mean, you had a picture of the outside of a police department with no dialogue on it, and just a picture of people walking outside and a little blurb of text at the top that says Fluorospark and 2 weeks ago. And immediately my critic's brain is like, what? Because first of all, why are we starting 2 weeks ago? Second of all, Fluorospark where? I think it's Fluorospark, Texas, because we're told that on the website, but if you don't tell us in the book, it's not canonical. So Fluorospark where? And then why, in God's name, when I've just paid $35 for a comic, am I seeing a basically blank page for my opener? Because I want to get my money's worth out of this damn comic. I mean, I know it's got about 90 to 100 pages, but I want to see text. I want to see an explanation of where I am, or how am I supposed to be viewing things? Is somebody talking in the background? Maybe somebody inside the building is talking. And then you cut on the next page to inside a building. But here's the problem. On the first page, you don't have the police department lined up front and center. So you don't know what building you just transitioned into. And you've got a couple of guys there in green uniforms, not blue uniforms, not like blue police uniforms. They're green uniforms. Are they janitors? I mean, how do you know? I don't know what to make of these guys who are in green uniforms. Are they postal workers? Are they janitors? Are they, because cops, as far as I know, wear blue. And you're in some guy's office and they're watching a TV and there's still no dialogue. Oh, Brian Suddenly Old says, I thought they were Army. Yeah, how would you know? And so I was wondering, well, are we inside the police department or are we inside of the building next to the police department? And I look at the building next to the police department and it's got this weird lettering on it that I can't make out. And I'm like, does that say florist? Does that say somebody's flowers or something? What does that say? I had to take off my glasses and look at it and realize that it didn't say anything because it was a big smudge on there. I'm like, damn it, I can't even figure out what the freaking lettering on the building next to the police department says, so I guess it must be the police department where we are, but that was the only way I knew. And it turns out the reason that the lettering was smudged is because that whole building was a big 3D asset, and we'll get into that later. But the whole thing was a big 3D asset that had been tilted in such a way that the lettering on it, which actually did read the name of a flower shop, got all squinched up and snarled up and just basically blurred together. So on the very first two opening pages of ISOM number 1, I'm already looking and I'm seeing all these different problems. I'm in an office, in a building, and the office can't actually work like this in three-dimensional space. And there's other doors to this office. It's like, who the hell is this guy that he's got so many doors coming in and out of his office? That's usually, you don't see that in an office. And then you've got, Dan Evans says it was digitally compromised. And then he's, throwing people out of his office. Now and it turns out that this was the Mick Davies guy. If you've seen my recent clip or in my community post, this was the guy who, he's the old white guy who later got race swapped into a black guy. And, but you don't know his name. You don't get anybody's name from this first scene. You don't even get the name of the person who's supposedly back when you get this woman walking into the door saying, "Boss, she's back." And the guy's shocked. And then we cut to Silman Ranch on the outskirts of Shadow Valley, which apparently is near Florespark. Brian Suddenly Old says, I didn't even notice that swap. I tell you, that almost disqualified Horseman for me when I saw that, because I was just like, what the hell? How can the editing be this bad? And so on the transition page, you now have earlier that day. Earlier that day. What is that supposed to mean? Because we started off 2 weeks ago, and now it says earlier that day. Does it mean earlier today? Or does it mean earlier that day 2 weeks ago? It's impossible to tell. So now you've got like an unclear timeline going on in the book. And remember, Eric July has made his business critiquing other comics, and now you're looking at his comic, and he's getting all of these things wrong. You'll have to go back and watch all of my videos if you want on ISOM number 1 to show just how much wrong there was in the book. But the fact that I was actually able to get like 11 videos out of that is a bad sign. I got at least 11, maybe 13 by the time the whole thing was done. I got a whole crap ton of videos showing all of the different problems that there were in that book. And people noticed. People didn't notice me so much because I was I mean, really, I was nobody at the time. If I'm nobody now, then boy, was I nobody back then. I only had about 100 subscribers at the time. Now I've got about 1,140. So, Rippaverse has been very good to me as far as subscribers go. But people were noticing that this was not a quality book. But try telling Eric that. And part of the problem with the people who did try telling Eric that was that they were either inclined to be or set up to be antagonists. And that's where like Dick Masterson comes in. Let me catch up on there. Let's see. Karate Stick says it means businessman. And Moral Fat 40 ounce. It's profoundly stupid. Brian Suddenly Old says, then why didn't I? Why? That's why I didn't notice. I dropped off with ALPHACORE and ISOM #2. Yeah, it was in Horseman that took place. Dan Alvin says 11 videos on ISOM #1 at least. Wow, he says, yeah, at least 11 videos on ISOM #1. And by the way, when Rippaverse Trinity comes around, because I did order that volume, God, I had to order that volume. Oh Lord, I'm so looking forward to that volume. And the reason being is because Eric has actually ordered that some of the artwork and such be remastered for that copy of ISOM #1. So now you're already going to have two different versions of ISOM #1. There's going to be, of course, the original versions that we all bought, and now a remastered version that's going to be in Rippaverse Trinity. And I'm going to look. That is going to be one of the next things I critique as well, and I will do that in the Let's Fix style that I used on ISOM #2. I want to go through that book and actually show this is what I would have done if I had any editorial say over ISOM #1, and just go through and fix all the things that I found wrong in that. But I want to first see what it is that he thinks is now fixed, because I am willing to bet you that they broke more than they fixed. I saw what claimed to be some sample pages of, here is like some fixed artwork, and I'm looking at that and I'm like, this is worse than the first stuff. So I don't know if that was authentic or not. I'm just saying I don't have any confidence in their editorial team that they should even know what was wrong. So yeah, so here comes Dick Masterson, and unfortunately, Dick Masterson and Vito Gesualdi, they have a podcast together called The Biggest Problem in the Universe, and they just like to savage whatever is out there. There are a couple of comedians who are like very, very caustic in their humor, and so they will basically take a subject and just beat it to death. And one of the things Dick Masterson did was say that ISOM was going to be a crap book. And like, oh, I just know it's going to be a crap book. I don't even have to read it. Now, people basically said, Dan Alvin says, better color palette in the upgraded ISOM #1. I honestly don't think so. That's part of what I saw on that page. So I don't know. I mean, I'm going to have to see when that comes in. But Dick Masterson, he was savaging it, but he never read it. So he was just basically brutalizing it. And there were a lot of people who were like that online. They didn't actually read the book, and then they were nevertheless savaging the book, not having any idea what it was they were talking about. They were all just kind of feeding off, some of the negative spray that people who had actually read the book were giving online. And then you had people like Dick Masterson who was picking up on that and saying, well, this is just going to be garbage. Now, Dick actually got pushback from other podcasters saying, look, if you're going to be talking shit about ISOM #1, you need to read ISOM #1 and then actually tell us what is wrong with the book. So he did. He wound up making about 100 freaking notes of things that he found wrong with ISOM #1. Now, here is where people, I differ from people like Ethan Van Sciver and various people who have seen Dick Masterson's notes. Dick Masterson's notes were largely shit. Eric July actually went through his notes on a live stream one at a time, and I don't know if debunk is the right words, but basically explains that all of the stuff that he was complaining about, almost all of the stuff that he was complaining about, was sheer nonsense. It was stuff that somebody could have easily just discerned from the book if he gave it more than a cursory read. They were bullshit notes, with the exception of 3 particular good ideas. And let's see. I'd argue that, well, you're all fucking wrong. I hate to tell you that. Salty Traveling says, I'd argue that Masterson, in fact, did have quality feedback. You're wrong. You're just plain wrong. If you look at the book as it's intended to be read as part 1 of a story, you will actually see that this fits the thing that Dick Masterson was referring to, which was what he called the Save the Cat template. Save the Cat is a 13-step screenplay template that basically gives you everything that you need in order to write, a typical movie. And if you look at ISOM number 1, it goes all the way up through the first half of that Save the Cat screenplay. And what Dick Masterson's mistake was that he wanted the entire book to fit into that roadmap. And it's a, what is that? It's a comic? Well, no shit, it's a comic. Death Fab is saying it's a comic. I know that. But comics and screenplays are very, very similar. And so he wanted basically ISOM number 1 to be a complete story in and of itself that would have the arcing action and then the denouement, and then you go into issue number 2. And that is not what Eric July had in mind for ISOM number 1. Now, would it have been better had Eric July planned it out that way, so that there was more of a complete story to each issue of ISOM that we're getting? Yes. But considering that he's an amateur writer, this is his first comic book, and he's planning this out, and he's telling us up front, this is at least a 2-issue or 3-issue arc, we should expect that it's not going to be smooth the first time out, and that he may not adhere to what we think is the entire template. Eccentric, $5, thank you, says, give him hell, Mike, stir those hot coals, man. And this is your 10th super on a live stream. Well, congratulations to you for being so generous. So that puts us at $15 towards YAIRA number 2. Still need $35 to get there. Denouement. What? Uncapped Turtle. Okay, am I pronouncing denouement wrong? It's denouement. Fucking French people. God damn it, you French! You and your silent consonants. Eccentric says, "You deserve it, man." So when Dick Masterson gave all these notes, a lot of these notes had to do with the fact that that Eric had not put forward a complete story according to that template, but he wasn't obligated to do so. Dick should have realized that, okay, we've come up to the point where we're at the halfway mark and only judge the book according to that template. Plus, there were a whole bunch of times when Dick just gave notes that were like, well, I don't understand Jasmine's motivation here. It's like, no shit, neither do we. But he's not supposed to give that out yet. Or why is it that, who what is it? Who is this Mrs. Newman or something? It's like, it just fucking said it's Jasmine, it's mother. So anyway, I've got a whole video where I critique the Masterson notes. And I found that there were only 3 notes that Dick gave in that whole slew that made any sense at all. One of which I mentioned already was the whole, why do we have a 2 weeks ago? And why is it that when we come to the present day, we have earlier that day instead of now, which is really what was necessary. There's also another note in which where he talks about a particular scene where Avery Silman, ISOM, the protagonist of the book, is punching a guy in the chest. And in order to show how strong Avery is, they kind of cut to an X-ray picture of the guy where he like cracks the guy's ribs. But then the guy has like blood bursting out of his mouth or something, and it's like, okay, you just killed the guy. And obviously, that's not what was intended to be portrayed. The artist went a little overboard in putting all that together. But he's not, that's something you just got to overlook at that point, because there are going to be mistakes made, and there were plenty of mistakes made in that book. Salty Traveling Sea. So you're saying technically ISOM was a beat for beat of a common screenplay format that's fair, but did it actually produce the desired results? Sales would say otherwise. Well, no, I'm not saying that it didn't have problems. It had plenty of problems, but I'm saying that the critique that Masterson was applying to the book didn't fit what it was he was trying to say the book should be. He was acting as if the book needed to have this whole arc, when the book actually has this kind of arc and stops there. What else we got? Denouement. Okay, fine. I'm probably just going to keep calling it denouement, because goddamn French. That first issue should draw you in and keep you wanting more. Well, for me, it did. When I got done with ISOM #1, and this is one of the reasons why I rated it a 6 on my 10-point scale, is that despite all of the technical problems that it still had me wanting to see ISOM #2. And ISOM #2 was something that would give, if he could improve with ISOM #2, then things would get better. But it was a good enough first start. Salty Traveling says, so it's your opinion that Dick's notes were shit, not that there's common standards to define equality that refute Dick's notes. Gotcha. That's fine. I mean, when you no, I mean, wait a minute. The common standard I just applied was the Save the Cat format that Dick himself referenced. So when he's saying that the book doesn't fit this template and he's misapplying the template, he's fucked himself. So that's basically the argument I'm making. Brian Suddenly Old, the Dick notes were his notes as he was reading that he used to write the review. They were not meant to be an actual critique. I don't remember him actually making a review of the book. Karate Stick says, you should expect the writer to have something to say in a 70-plus page book. I don't know if that's true, in the sense that when you've got still at least one other book to do, at that point you can gauge the whole thing together and say, okay, over the course of this arc, did he really have something to say? Yeah, I can't say I necessarily agree with that. His actual Brian Suddenly, his actual critique was fair. Well, I'll tell you what, if you can get me a link to his actual critique, I'll read that and I'll see if it actually seemed to be worth something. Deathfab says, yeah, because there was nothing in issue 1. See, I can't agree with that, because I know that I at least saw enough in issue #1 where I wanted to see in issue #2, because we still had the mystery of why is it that he quit superheroing if he was no longer a superhero. What was the deal with Jasmine? Was she actually the one behind all this stuff, or is she a pawn of Darren? How is Darren going to react to the beatdown that Avery just gave him and his staff? Is there going to be a rematch between Avery and Santuan at some point? How is that going to all fall out? There was also, of course, the little thing about Sam going into the drawing his gun and going into the security house, and what happens to Sam after that. So there's plenty, then there's, of course, ALPHACORE, which is going to jump off into its own thing. There's YAIRA that's going to jump off into its own thing. So I found that ISOM #1 was chock full of errors as far as the technical merits of the book go. But as far as being a decent story, it was good enough to at least get me to want to read ISOM #2. But the problem is that when Eric got confronted with all of these notes that Dick had made about his book, and he was seeing just how ridiculous the majority of those were, then he was like, well, if this is what a genuine screenwriter can say about my book, then there must not actually be anything wrong with my book. And so Eric started ignoring all of the criticism. He didn't take any of the criticism, even the valid criticism that was there. He started to get this idea in his head that the only criticism you should take are from people who are on your side. And this is part of what caused another rift between Ethan Van Sciver and Eric July. That deepened the rift between them because Ethan was of the mind that no, everybody who your book comes in contact with is a potential resource for knowing what's right or what's wrong with the book. And if somebody's going to try and savage you about it, then maybe their advice is the advice you should listen to, especially if they have something good to say. You have to at least bring your own creative faculties and your critical faculties to their advice, but you need to be able to discern what among what they're saying, even if they hate you, even if they want your company to fail, they may still have a point. And if they have a point, you need to take that point, because if you can satisfy your worst critics, then you've improved your book enormously. Let's see what else is what was that? Dan Alvin, why did he land on a car roof? That's the big one. Well, and we've seen that car from so many different angles. What was let's see. Death Fab, what was in issue 1 then if you don't know anything about anything? Well, we know that, first of all, we know that Avery Silman is a rancher. We know that he has been, yeah, he used to be a superhero. We know that, I mean, we know the things that lead to the questions about the stuff that we don't know. You know, he went to see Darren. What was their past history with Darren, and why is it that Darren's copying an attitude to him now? Yeah, we know that Darren used to be, you know, friends with Avery, and now he's the shotgun. There's so much in the book that's really there, and then people are just like, well, you know, I don't care about that. I just want to see, you know, what's the superhero origin and other bullshit like that. That's another thing that people got onto him about, was like, why can't I see his origin right away? It's like, guys, you remember like that other superhero, you know, Batman, you know, where they kind of left out that whole origin thing for a few issues and then finally got around to telling us. Brian Suddenly Old says, later tonight I'll look at it. Yeah, please do. Thank you. Eccentric says echo chamber syndrome. Dan Alvin says it should have been perhaps a number 0 or -1 since it starts 2 weeks before initial continuity starts. Well, the 2 weeks ago was just applying to those first like 3 pages. And then when it says earlier that day, what actually should have been there is now, so that we understand that, you know, we've jumped 2 weeks ahead. Now, we still don't know why there was a 2-week gap between, you know, the 2 weeks ago and now. And that's one of the questions that, you know, I was thinking that YAIRA number 1 might actually shore up, but didn't. Death Fab says that's like 1 page in a comic. Well, your mileage may vary. But so you had this comic that dropped into everybody's hands. Clearly, it was a substandard comic. It was enough of a good start that if people had approached Eric in the beginning with the attitude of, look, you know, we like what you're doing here, but at the same time, there's a lot of room for improvement, instead of his being told this is a crap book over and over and over again, then, especially by people who hadn't read it, and then being given like crap notes by somebody who was supposed to be a respected person in the industry, then, you know, why would he ever take criticism after that? And in fact, he started a particular show on his podcast called Monetize Your Haters. At which point you could have just seen the fact that, number 1, people were going to come on and they were just going to be haters. You know, they weren't going to be actual rational critics of the book. He wasn't expecting them to be that. And so he wasn't going to be taking any of the advice that they were giving them. And I know, because I was one of the freaking haters that he monetized. I got on the show and I was basically going through the book and pointing these things out one at a time to him. And some of them, you know, he just freaking tried to gaslight me on. It's like, holy crap, you know, when I basically said, look, it's clear that the emphasis on this word should have been placed on this word, because there's no, you know, the sense of the meaning here, and blah blah blah. He's like, no, I meant it all to be that way. I'm like, dude, it's a freaking lettering mistake. It happens, okay? You can just admit that it happened, but he wouldn't. And at that point, I knew, when I probably should have known from even earlier than that that he was not going to take anything that anybody said as criticism. He had basically what, if you want to put it in biblical terms, hardened his heart against anybody's advice at that point, and he was just going to go on and do whatever it was he was going to do. And that was the infuriating thing. That was the disheartening thing. That was the thing that drove us fans crazy, to the point where, some people just decided, okay, from now on, I'm just going to try and do everything I can to tear him down. Now, I would still like to see the books. Well, I was going to say I would still like to see the books get better, but I tell you what, I mean, I've had so much disappointment with like every single freaking book that has come out of that freaking company, that I just don't have the confidence anymore. But getting back to that time, we still had confidence, and ISOM number 2 still could have been a comparative masterpiece. Because who knows? Maybe some of the critique would have gotten through. Maybe Eric would have listened to some of the advice and allowed that to season him as a writer. But I think a couple of things happened, and I can't really say this for sure, but I think when he saw the response, not just to ISOM, the positive response among his fans, because of course there was positive response as well as negative response. I mean, there was negative response from his critics and such, but there's an overwhelming positive response from his fans who absolutely were curious to see more about YAIRA and ALPHACORE and all these, and of course Norfolka, who is the bonus reveal of that. And people wanted to see more of these characters. And when he realized that the more characters he put into the book, the more interest he could generate in more of his properties. I don't know this, but I kind of suspect that he kind of jiggered around his plot lines so that he could introduce more characters up front, and that's how we got Bloodruth and Gooding in issue number 2 of ISOM. Issue number 2 of ISOM, I just expected to be, and I think a lot of us just expected to be, the Darren gets revenge issue. ISOM had just gone to Darren's club, torn it up, and blah blah blah. And now Darren was going to get his revenge and come after ISOM, come after his sister, and ISOM was going to have to get back into the superheroing business. And that was basically where issue 2 was going to go. That was the logical progression. Yeah, instead we got one big damn chaotic mess. And let me go over to here for a second. Death Fab, everyone was trying to be positive about it. It was Dick that was honest, but honestly wrong. Then Eric had a tantrum and turned everyone off. True. Dan Alvin said, Masterson is a drama farmer. I could probably see that. I don't really know him, but though, I mean, that's what the whole biggest problem shtick is, which is, yeah, that does sound right. Eric should have just brushed it off and maybe focused on less bombastic criticism, but he took it all so personal. Yes, exactly. And when he took it personally like that, then there was like nothing anybody could say, even down to the smallest little thing of, this word was bolded wrong. Or here of course was one thing that I got famous for, was telling him this truck is the wrong color. There's a scene in ISOM number 1 where a kid gets into a truck and the truck is colored like the truck that this other guy had driven up in, but he's actually in someone else's truck. So I'm like, when you have the kid get into a truck that's the wrong color, you make it think like he's going off with this guy instead of that guy. And he tried to give me some bullshit about, well, it's just part of a fleet of trucks and they're all colored the same thing. And I'm just like, no, we see the other guy's truck later in the book and it's not that color. So, God. Back Xavier says to Dan Alvin, facts. I mean, yeah, Eric just took all of this stuff so freaking personally that there was nothing you could say that would change his mind about pretty much anything. And so he just got kind of solidified, like, listening to the echo chamber that was all of his positive fans, all of the people who really didn't know what the hell they were talking about and just praised him to the heavens, and he accepted that and thought that whatever it was that he wrote was going to be the shit after that. And then ISOM number 2 came out, and he lost half of his readership. His purchaser count went down from about 45,000 to 23,000. That was a massive, massive hit. Eccentrics. Dan Alvin says, not for $3.7 million. You want consistent truck colors. That's right. And Eccentric says the devil is in the details, like truck colors. That's right. I'm waiting to see if this new updated version of ISOM number 1 that's going to come out in that Rippaverse Trinity has that fixed. I bet it won't, but I'm going to see. If they do fix the truck color, I'm going to be amazed. But then ISOM number 2 came out, and the sales for that were a stunning comparative failure. They were a stunning comparative failure. Now, it was still about $2.3 million, I want to say. It's hard for me to think back to those figures. So it's not like, he failed. It's not like it's not like the company was going to go out of business after that, or that was even in trouble after that. But that was nowhere near what he had made before. And it was nowhere near what people expected him to make, because, especially me, I thought he might make about $3.2 million. And the reason I thought that was because I thought people were going to get merchandise fatigue. They've already bought a whole bunch of merchandise that would go ahead. Uh-oh. What do we do? Okay, I got a little notice there that was saying that my connection was unstable and we're trying to reconnect. Is everybody there now? Hello? Okay, Eccentric says you're good. Yeah, new laptop. I'm worried. I gotta be worried. I gotta feel. It doesn't feel. Ooh, it's starting to feel a little bit warm towards the back, but not too bad. Slight delay, stream glitched. I'm good now. Okay, good. That was Andrew Rowland chiming in. And so when ISOM number 2 hit and we saw that the number of subscribers had dropped to 23,000, we were like, oh my God. Because I was in no way expecting that many people would have given up on the book just like that. And part of it may have been just the fact that people, there may have been a lot of speculators in the initial market for ISOM number 1. It was first comic of a startup comic book company. People may have just gone in thinking, hey, I'll go ahead and get this first issue, and then I'll just blow off the second issue. That may be one explanation. But another explanation is they just didn't really like what they saw in the first issue. And a lot of people tried to explain it away, saying, well, this happens with every comic. You get the first number 1 comic out on the rack, and then the number 2 comic is going to do half as well. But Ethan Van Sciver ably brushed off that kind of excuse, because what's happening in the retail market, when you go to the comic book store and you see a comic that's on the rack, that comic was actually purchased by the retailer like 3 months ago. And so the retailer has no idea when the next issue, which was solicited 2 months ago, I'm going to have to drink something here. When the next issue comes out, which is going to be in a month from now, so that was solicited 2 months ago, the retailer doesn't even know how the first issue sold. And so he has to assume that there's not going to be as much interest in the second issue as there was in the first, and so he just naturally cuts the orders in half. Now, that's natural for a retailer's market, but when you're dealing with independent comics, you're not going through a retailer. You're just connecting directly with the people who are producing the book. It's a direct sale. So if people like your book, they're going to get your book again. There's not just going to be this natural drop-off. It's only going to be a natural drop-off if people naturally don't like your book. So the fact that ISOM number 1 dropped so hard to ISOM number 2 was really, really a clarion call to worry. people were then starting to wonder, what's it going to be like by the time ISOM number 3 comes out? Because ISOM number 2 was a freaking disaster compared to ISOM number 1. When you looked at ISOM number 2 and you saw the quality of the writing in that book, it was so much worse that people were like, what are what? You had all of these people out there giving you criticism, and then you produce worse work than your first volume. How does that happen? You've got a story that is going all freaking over the place. You got a story that starts off and starts off in the worst way possible with ISOM's sister unidentified in an walking in a hallway in a building we don't know. Who is this woman? We don't even know who this woman is if you're just coming into the book. I mean, you can kind of guess it's ISOM's sister, but all she is just walking along and kind of frowning. I don't even know if you knew it's the Projexis building. I'd have to look it up at this point. But who is she in that building? What does she do? No, there's nothing to introduce her. And then she walks into her office and Darren's sitting right there, and he's still not named. He's named Darren, but you still don't even know his last name. And you won't know it until close to the end of ISOM number 2. Can you imagine that? You have a comic book with a clear hero and a clear villain, and you never mention the villain's last name until the last section of your second issue. What? So then we go from and then we get introduced to the girl's boss, who grows different facial hair on every page. That's how great the artwork was in that second book. And then we go to Avery having a therapy lesson with his tailor. Now, the guy who's making his costume is the guy who's giving him psychological advice about why he quit the superheroing business so many years ago. And not only does the superheroing advice, the advice that he gives Avery make no sense, but even what happened in the past, the introduction of this monster Shadron, why we even know his name, we don't know, because, he's given the name on the page. Altona, Avery's sister Altona couldn't even be identified on the page, but we know Shadron's name because why? And this monster kills a girl in front of him, and that's just enough reason for him to up and quit. There's no real psychology going on with this book. I mean, we were supposed to be given the mystery and the revelation of why it was that Avery had quit the superheroing business, and then it was like something that a 5-year-old could have put together. And then Avery goes back to his farm, and his farm is now being attacked by these things called Hellions or Devilings. And where the fuck do they even come from? What is this? Why is he not dealing with like Darren's henchmen setting his place on fire? Why are we dealing with Hellions and Devilings now? Well, it's because we need to bring Bloodruth into it somehow, and we're going to do that by way of Gooding, who's going to come in and put out the fire because he charges people a nominal fee for coming in and putting out fires. If all of this sounds fucking stupid, it is. And so by the time you get to the end of ISOM number 2, you're like, I don't know where the fuck this company is going. And then, of course, he also lands in the middle of his trademark dispute with the International School of Ministry. And that's when things really go south, because now we have no idea when ISOM number 3 is going to come out. First, they've got to settle this whole, International School of Ministry thing with whatever consequences are going to come out of that. Let's see here. Dan Alvin says, didn't like for $50 what they might have had more patience for $5 in a shop. Did that happen though? Did it happen that way though? Did it really happen that way that the $5 sales for ISOM number 1, did that happen just before the ISOM number 2 arrived at the warehouse, because I remember he did say he was making room in the warehouse for something, and I can't remember whether it was ISOM number 2. Andrew Rowland says, this makes me believe that ISOM 1 and 3 are the actual ill-advised arc. That's what I think too. And I could be wrong. I mean, I've been wrong about other things. I was definitely wrong about thinking that Mike Barron had originally turned in a 96-page script that the Rippaverse editors had cut in half and then blown up. That turned out not to be the case. So let's see. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put it past Eric to have rearranged his story so that he could introduce Gooding and Bloodruth earlier, so that he could launch those characters earlier. Fan art exhibit says Eric expects people to simply stick around instead of him earning the right for his stories to be further read by the audience. And there is a core audience of his that is sticking around. There's probably a good 1,000, 2,000 or so people out there who are still buying a whole bunch of his stuff. Is that going to be enough to sustain the comic going forward, or the comic book company going forward? Possibly, depending on how much stuff he's able to crank out. Because I think that's basically what he's trying to do, is start cranking out enough books in enough mass amounts that he's able to keep the company afloat. But at least until some studio whale or something sees the properties and says, oh, I can turn this into a movie, and then hopefully he'll be set. Brian Suddenly Old says, we are to the out of left field hell monkeys. Yes. Brian Suddenly Old says, no, the $5 sale was after YAIRA. Okay, that was actually quite late then. Karate Stick, there were multiple $5 sales. Yeah, but there was the one that was about the book, because I remember I took advantage of one of the $5 sales where it was like $5 on some not posters, although it might have been posters, but there was also shirts and the Rippaverse cap, which I've still got here. Yeah, so I think I picked this up for $5, and or maybe it was $20 there, but there were some Rippaverse t-shirts that I got for $5. So yeah, I have picked up some cheap Rippaverse merch myself in one of those $5 sales. I just wish I could have gotten my $35 copy of ISOM number 1 cover C for $5. But so when ISOM number 2 came out, it was like, okay, so I guess nothing we say is possibly going to make this company any better, so why should we stick around? And sure enough, when ALPHACORE came out, ALPHACORE not even being written by Eric July, but was actually written by Chuck Dixon and drawn by Joe Bennett, they lost half of their readership on that one too. And that was they went down on that one from, I think, about 23,000 to about 11,000 purchasers. And that may have been the last time that they started reporting on purchasers, because I think they realized what an embarrassment that was. I mean, they were down to a quarter of their original audience after just 2 books. It was just incredibly freaking sad. Dan Alvin says, I just meant what might have been the reaction if it had been $5. If it had been a $5 cover initially, like a regular Indian. Yeah, but for that many pages, it wouldn't have been. It would have been. For a 96-page book, you're looking at about $15 minimum. YAIRA 2 sales, this is from Fan Art Exhibit, YAIRA 2 sales are at 242,000 only. His business is unsustainable at this level. It's looking like, 242,000 for the number 2, but and the first one, YAIRA was another. YAIRA was a partial flop in that everybody expected it to do better than ALPHACORE, and it was soon becoming clear that it was not going to do as well as ALPHACORE, or it would only just barely get there. Everybody expected YAIRA number 1 to do 1.5 million, and the only way that he managed to get there was by dropping that McFarlane Toys statue of YAIRA. And the statue sales bumped up the campaign so that he could claim a 1.5 million finish for YAIRA number 1. Yeah, it was if Fan Art Exhibit mentions the word mammoth. That was supposed to be his mammoth character. That was gonna be their mammoth campaign. And it fell about as tepid as ALPHACORE did. And then, of course, we got ALPHACORE, which was written by Chuck Dixon. So the writing quality kind of had a better baseline to it than Eric's did, but it still wasn't A game material. And I think I could safely say that because there were certain rules that were broken just in the internal logic of the book. You had a villain whose desire was to stay concealed and safe from ALPHACORE, and instead she goes and does like the thing that's going to make them want to pursue her even more. And then you have another character who's basically told, yes, you're a power level 2 person now, but if you train hard enough, you can get your powers up to speed. And instead, he like is able to burn himself out completely at level 10 the next day with no training. So it's not an internally consistent book. It's not an externally consistent book because the characters of Brian Solari, Ingrid Valdez, well, Braxwell is Braxwell. He never talk. He rarely ever talks, so you don't know anything about him anyway. But Brian Solari and Ingrid Valdez, who have already been portrayed in ISOM #2 for a very brief segment, sound nothing like they did there and will sound nothing like they did again in YAIRA #1. And then you've got the characters of Lillian Renashi and Michael Copper, and they kind of neither look nor sound. I mean, Lillian looks about the same and sounds about the same, but Michael Copper neither looks nor sounds like he did in ISOM #1. So there's like extraordinary incompetence when it comes to having these characters speak with a consistent voice. And so people are seeing another flaw in the system adding up already. And then came Gooding the Polymath. Now, by this time, by the way, things between Eric July and Ethan Van Sciver had just gone completely south. And the reason for that was, and let me just give kind of the best explanation that I can in a short amount of time as I can. Ethan tried to be positive toward Eric July at the very beginning. I mean, he even drew a cover for ISOM #2, and it turned out to be their best-selling cover, although it only sold slightly more than the A cover that he was really competing with. And he tried to be positive. He tried to be helpful. But he also knew that there were problems with ISOM #1 and with ISOM #2. And at some point, Eric July contacted him via text, and Ethan does not like to be contacted via text, for one thing, basically saying that, you need to stop giving a platform to the people who are against me, or else I'm going to, you know, I am no longer going to block people who are against you from my platform. So Ethan took that to be a threat, and for a while he said, "Okay, well, let's just come to an agreement and bury the whole thing." But he always chafed under that, and for several months he chafed under the fact that he had kind of knuckled under before Eric July's threat, knowing that Eric was, had the bigger customer base and could potentially sabotage Ethan's customer base. Uh, and so he held on to his anger until Eric was just basically outright denying certain things that Ethan said, but that Ethan said he had the receipts for. And so Ethan dumped some texts online that showed the conflict between the two of them. And at that point, any kind of alliance between Rippaverse and Comicsgate was pretty much over. There would still be a couple of Comicsgate artists who would do things for and writers who would do things for Eric. I mean, Mike Barron, of course, is writing Gooding the Polymath, and he'll be writing the upcoming Gooding series, as well as a new series called Delta Base. And you had Graham Nolan, who I believe was the one to do the I think he did the special cover of YAIRA #1. And so you still have some interactions with between comic skaters and the Rippaverse, but it's a very, very carefully parceled, carefully separated set of domains at this point. I mean, there's people who are welcome in both spheres, and then there are other people who are just basically not caring to associate in either in those directions at all. Moreover, Eric July started issuing kind of attacks on the crowdfunding system that underlies all of Comicsgate's work by saying that there were artists who were taking advantage of the fans and not delivering products in a timely fashion. Now, of course, the crowdfunding basis is I'm giving you the money in the hopes that you will take this to produce a product worthy of the money. So take as long as you need. There are, just keep me informed. That's the basic agreement between somebody who donates to crowdfunding and somebody who is the artist who wants to create a product for the people that he's crowdfunding. So when Eric July came down on that, definitely soured Shane Davis toward him. And Shane had also drawn a cover for him at that point. He did the cover for ISOM #2, the special foil cover. And it just basically it resonated as an attack on the business model of independent comic publishers who don't have the storehouse of money that Eric July had when starting his company. So that created even more bad blood amongst the two sectors, the Rippaverse sector and the Comicsgate sector. So that was going on at the same time, and Ethan wound up, eventually falling out with Yellow Flash, who basically stabbed Ethan in the back by revealing Ethan's friends cover rate, and also by deleting a forum that was used by comic skaters. And so Ethan started up Trashcast versus Yellow Flash's Flashcast as a competing live stream where he could just basically make fun of Eric July and do that, which is only served really to make Eric even more hard against criticism, because now he's getting it on the regular from Eric July and a bunch of people who are kind of dedicated detractors and who are watching Eric July's streams and kind of monitoring everything he does. Of course, you've got Katydid, who provides a lot of snips and clips from various live streams. You've got BTM Reviews, who has kind of gathered around himself a bunch of people who are not fans of Eric July. And I've appeared on his live stream sometimes. So you've got a whole bunch of people out there who have really Frog Tony's another one, who have kind of made it their business to give Eric July the business. And I don't really consider myself that much among them, because I try to keep myself to just basically critiquing the comics and occasionally making Eric July or anybody else aware of the problems in the comics, like I did recently on the Rip and Silverback show, where I was able to inform Eric about the race swapping and age swapping, occupation swapping of one of the characters that he created that occurred in Horseman #1. I don't know if there'll be a sequel to that, but it's tempting. We'll see how many streams I can get banned from. I mean, hey, it was a super chat. Just take my money. Let's see what you got here. Dan Alvin says, same reason you don't get accurate sales figures from DC or Marvel anymore. LOL. It's embarrassing. Eccentric says, but at least the YAIRA trailer gave critics endless hours of entertainment. Oh, yes. Oh, God. My mind's eye just got stabbed with memories of the YAIRA #1 live action trailer. I mean, that was something nobody was expecting, and it was just the most laughable thing you can imagine. I mean, you watch that trailer and you're just like, no, I'm not really seeing this. I'm not really watching this, am I? This is not real. This is not real. I'm dreaming. I'm dreaming I'm watching one of the worst live action comics trailers that has ever been produced. Oh God, I've got a video on that too, so feel free to look it up. But yes, at the beginning of the YAIRA #1 campaign, Eric July released a live action YAIRA trailer featuring a large blonde woman with a horrific fake accent and special effects that kind of barely resembled the action that would be taking place in the comic. That did not set people up with a good feeling toward YAIRA #1. Fan art exhibit said, I'm convinced Eric has talked himself into believing things are better than they are. Well, part of the thing is it's hard to gauge how things are. And I mean, Chris Bacon's probably the guy who has done the most in-depth, spreadsheet driven behind the scenes research on Eric July's business and the sales of the comic books. He's probably got a better grasp than anybody. So I don't know if he has a channel or not, but if he comes out with any videos on how ISOM is or how the Rippaverse is doing, he's probably one of the best sources to look at. But you never know. I mean, so long as he can keep hold of the artist, I think if his writers start to depart, that's when there's going to be a problem. If Mike Barron decides he's got better things to do, if Chuck Dixon decides he's got better things to do, if the Soska sisters decide they've got better things to do, there's going to be trouble. Because if you can't keep the writers, then there's something wrong. Something is not right in the state of Denmark. But as far as whether the company's on the verge of folding or not, I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. He's got such big plans for this next year that I would almost hate to see things fall apart before he at least gets to go through most of what he's got planned. Now, of course, if the company were to collapse before Salvage PI and Sersha #1 came out, I'd be fine with that. I have no need to see those. Speaking of things I have no need to see, I just want to remind everybody, YAIRA #2 is on the table as far as funding my reviews. I've got $15 collected so far towards getting two copies of YAIRA #2. Just need $35 more, and I will be putting out a review of YAIRA #2. So if that's something that you want to see from me, please do contribute into the pile. Dan Alvin says, giving ultimatums to a guy from Jersey sometimes has unintended consequences. Well, I know it's been lucrative for Ethan Van Sciver because I know that he funds his family outings off of the trash casts. And so a lot of people give him a lot of super chats. Brian Suddenly Old says, so bad, but we took it like a chomp. Referring to the horrible accent of the ISOM model. Poor girl. I guess that's supposed to be Icelandic or something. Brian Suddenly Old also says EJ pays writers really well from the scuttlebutt I've heard in the YouTube chats. Yeah, pays them well, pays them on time. So yeah, I mean, if something were to happen there where he wasn't able to pay and retain his writers, that's when you can see the writing on the wall, I would say. But that's probably kind of far off because, Chuck Dixon is going to be writing a bunch of stuff. The Soskas are writing their own individual titles now. They're going to be, let's see what else. Mike Barron's slated to do more. So I think there's a lot of work on all of their plates that is, likely to, something you hope is going to hit. And I always say that there is that spark in ISOM #1 that I still would really like to see that one, assuming that ISOM #3 turns out to be good. I would really like to see that possibly picked up and optioned for a movie. Not so much the rest of the titles, though. I'm not really all that concerned with those. Uh, God. Oh, the things that are coming out. So anyway, that I think I was at Gooding in the history of the Rippaverse, and Gooding, god damn, that thing just broke me. I mean, that was the comic where I was just like, you know what? I don't have any confidence in this company at all anymore because I could not believe how bad that comic was. I mean, it's almost was like it was written stream of consciousness in one take with no revisions going back to actually try and make it, structurally sound. That's all I can think of at this point because there's like I've shown in one of my videos. I mean, 25% of the book is just bloat. You can get rid of 25% of the book and still have the same book. And that's not the kind of stuff that you really want to see in one of your comics. Resistance Publishing says, I'm surprised that you had any confidence in Rippaverse at all. Well, up to the point where, ISOM 2 came out and just absolutely shattered any real confidence that I had. And of course, when Chuck Dixon came aboard, it was kind of like, well, maybe this is the guy who's going to pull it out. But again, I didn't feel like that was the plot of ALPHACORE was completely sensible. Brian suddenly old Mike needs a good editor to make his project sing. Check out Bronze Star. I've heard about Bronze Star, and I will be looking at his next Sherlock Holmes book that's coming out. The one with Sherlock Holmes and Captain Nemo. I've got that on order. Fan art exhibit. Everyone assumed Eric knew what he was doing, and that's why there was confidence. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, when you've got a guy who's got so many videos out there talking about here's what's wrong with comics, you would think that he would know what was wrong with his own, and that he'd be able to see, this is not right. This is not, the basic level of quality I need from one of my own books. And I don't know if maybe it's just it would have cost too much to have some of the pages redone, or maybe have some more pages added or something like that. It will be, like I said, when this ISOM #1 in the Rippaverse Trinity book comes out, it is going to be hella interesting to see what they put together for that. Brian Suddenly Old says he has a good editor on Sherlock, and that really is, you're bringing up a really good point here. Fan art exhibit says knowing what the problem is and knowing how to fix it are two different things. This is true. I've actually looked back at some of my own writing I have a book out there called Thoughts Along the Way. I have some ebooks on Amazon in case anybody was interested in looking at those. And one of them, Thoughts Along the Way, is like a collection of 20 years of my writings. And I remember at one point I saw an essay in there, and there was a sentence in there, and I'm like, that sentence isn't right, but I don't know how to make it right either. So I just left it the way it was. Sometimes you just got to be like, well, it still communicates what I wanted to communicate, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. But getting back to Brian Suddenly Old's point, he has a good editor. Mike Barron has a good editor on the Sherlock Holmes book. Editing is so important. That every single independent comic book publisher out there ought to know that by now. And it is kind of surprising that they don't have more people out there who are willing to step in and edit. And it's funny. I was at a happy hour. I was mentioning I was at a happy hour the other day, and somebody asked me. He says, well, if you could retire tomorrow, what would you do? And I said I would create a company that would edit comics. I would basically offer my services as a comic book editor to any of the companies out there that would need it, any of the independent publishers and such who needed someone to look over their plots, look over their scripts, look over their pencils, their inks, their colors, whatever the finished book. I'm not sure how much, I could really contribute in some of those areas. I'm not like an expert colorist or anything like that. But if you needed help in that way, then I could possibly provide help for a fee. And yeah, for or maybe I could put you on a subscription plan for 49.99 a month, like Gooding. Uh, but that's probably what I would do, because what I really see out there is a lot of people with a lot of talent who don't know either when to kind of, step back and let the comic breathe a little, or maybe they need to invest more of themselves into the comic in order to get it up to the standard that it needs to be. And that would probably be a kind of one of those fun, here's how I coast out the rest of my days kind of business. Let's see. Brian Suddenly Old. I think the editors at the Rippaverse were intimidated by the talent EJ hired. I mean, that's entirely possible, but it just depends on how much confidence they have on themselves as well. I mean, and also just how much talent they have for this kind of stuff. Because I mean, think about this. Think about the fact that you have this character, Mick Davies, old white guy. He's featured prominently in ISOM #1. He's in one panel of YAIRA #1. And here comes Horseman #1. And how many editors does Horseman #1 have? You've got the Soska sisters who have to make sure they have to read it over in order to maintain the lore. You've got whoever was the lead editor on that book to begin with. I don't know who that was. I want to say Andrew, but I could be wrong about that. Um, you should have Eric July himself, who created the character Mick Davies, and you would think that any one of them would notice, hey, I thought he was a white guy and he's black here. I mean, when you've got at least 4 other sets of eyes on the book, don't you think one of them is going to catch the fact that your white character is now black and demoted? I, it just pains me to think of all of the stuff that they let through that gets into readers' hands and makes the reader just say, what the fuck is this? Even when it comes down to just regular typos. I mean, I've seen like text on the back of some of these Rippaverse books where you see 2 words stuck together, like the space between them was left out. It doesn't take much to read the goddamn back matter of your own book. How do you do that? How do you let that go through? I really wonder if one of the reasons why Eric July has hired this woman Gothix to do his public relations for him is so that he can pay more attention to his editorial duties as editor in chief of Rippaverse Comics, because somebody needs to. Obviously, the people who they've currently got hired for that are just not cutting the mustard. I mean, that's kind of what I would love to send in another super chat out there and just basically say, okay, so you've said that Mick Davies is the old white police chief from ISOM #1 and YAIRA #1, but on his character page on your website, you say that he's a detective who's Callie Briggs' partner. And then we see in Horseman #1 that Callie Briggs' partner, Mick Davies, is a young black man. So who's right, and how much are you paying the Soska sisters to keep all this straight? They are the lore keepers, right? Ugh. We got here. Dan Elvin says EVS doesn't believe Chuck wrote ALPHACORE completely unimpeded, if I remember his review correctly. Haven't read Dixon recently, but his older stuff continues to impress me. I I think the scripts were turned in as is because I just know that from what Mike Barron said, he turned in his script as is, and whatever changes were made to it were superficial. They didn't affect the plot in any great degree. Puma Fist, what's up, witches and warlocks? Puma Fist turning in. Well, wow, you're late. Uh, you're just coming in when we're kind of dialing down. Andrew Rowland says, I just wonder the editors in Rippaverse are not motivated to edit the book. Andrew, come on. I'm going to wind up reading this stuff anyway. You shouldn't like try and super chat and jump the line like that, but I do appreciate it. That's $5 more towards the YAIRA #2 fund. So we're $20 in and $30 away from a review of YAIRA #2. So if anyone else wants to contribute on that, YAIRA #2, I just need $30 more to pick up 2 copies of that, one for scans and one for a personal reading copy. I just wonder if the editors are not motivated enough to care for continuity and just use it as an easy paycheck. Honestly, I think you may be right on that because, like I said, some of this stuff feels pretty damn phoned in. Acentric says, talking about my idea about opening up a comics editing business sounds like a good plan, Mike, and much needed too. Brian Suddenly Old says maybe they have to have 2 different McDavies on the force. Well, first of all, it's Mick Mick first name, and then Davies D8. And I actually that's what I basically proposed. Is that they should make him father and son. And it'd be just like Nick Fury in the Marvel universe, where you've got the older white father and the younger black son. I figure make McDavies the Nick Fury of the Rippaverse, and you could actually probably have a nice police procedural or something, and have Mike Barron write that. Dan Elvin says the Dixon book is especially anomalous, in my humble opinion. Had high hopes. Yeah, even Horseman. When I read Horseman, I was just kind of like, I know he's capable of better than this. Fan Art Exhibit says Eric's book lacks passion. When I read Fiendish by Irene Draws, I could see the care she put into the book. Eric's similar to Shadiversity, unashamed to take shortcuts, and it shows. Yeah, I think the biggest problem that Eric's writing has is that he holds things too close to the vest in a lot of his pages. He kind of he doesn't want to put thoughts in his characters' heads. He would rather have the readers put thoughts in his characters' heads. And the problem with that is that, the readers kind of want to hear from you what it is your characters are thinking, because if they don't, then they know they're just making stuff up as they go along, and it doesn't feel like they're really participating in anything. It feels like they're having to kind of fanfic their way through the comic. And readers shouldn't have to do that. They shouldn't have to pick up that kind of work. Let's see. Andrew Rowland. So this comic editorial business would be like an agency for editors. Well, it would start out as just me. I have no idea who else I would be able to suggest as an editor besides me. But I would just basically be doing editing services for a flat fee, probably. Puma Fist, July's books lack talent all around. I don't really agree with that, because like one of the things we were talking about, the 3D assets, and this was another scandal that affected Rippaverse for a while, although I never really felt it should have been as scandalous as it was. People began to detect that artist Cliff Richards was using a program called SketchUp and was taking objects from the computer, and instead of having to draw these objects by hand himself, all he had to do was lay down the object and use the computer to rotate it into the particular position it needed to be. And this could be humans, this could be trucks, this could be buildings, it could be really anything. And then he could kind of put a filter over it to make it look as though it had been hand drawn. And people noticed that to the extent that so much in ISOM #1 and ISOM #2 fit this. They were even able to match the 3D objects he had used in other comic books that he had drawn to what was being used in ISOM #1. In fact, there was a hilarious scene that somebody managed to pull out of another Cliff Richards drawn book where the house interior matched the house interior in ISOM #2, right down to the couch the characters were sitting on. And so people were saying that, this was lazy. This was not, for one thing, this was not what Eric was paying for. But my feeling about the use of 3D objects has always been, whatever shortcut techniques you want to take and still tell the story in a good and concise and believable and understandable way, knock yourself out. I mean, I really could care less whether the objects had to be drawn by you with feeling or with gusto or with whatever the hell it is that drawing it by hand is supposed to accomplish. If you're drawing a truck, I don't really care about the truck so much as the fact of where's the truck going, where's the character going. It's like what are we doing in this scene? As opposed to how did this truck get on the page? That doesn't really matter so much to me. In fact, I'm really I was there's a sequence in ISOM #2 that's by Cliff Richards, and I'm sure that 3D assets were used throughout the scene, but it's so clear what it is he's communicating, and it has to be because Eric July didn't provide any dialogue for any of those scenes, that he tells the story just silently with his artwork alone, and it's pretty great. So, I mean, if honestly, if I wanted to hire somebody and, I had a choice between, Cliff Richards and some unknown, I'd probably take Cliff Richards and say, hey, you want to use SketchUp, knock yourself out. Just make sure it's at least as good as the sequences that I've seen him draw. Let's see. Brian Suddenly Old. Dixon's favorite thing about the Rippaverse is Eric pays on time. That was a direct quote from an interview about the Rippaverse from an outside interviewer. Yeah, I think he even had that in his dedication page. Fan art exhibit says young adult authors write vague characters, which is targeted toward girls, so they can self-insert themselves into the main characters. Eric seems to write the same. Dan Alvin says, Brian, yep, good quote from Chuck Dixon. Dan Alvin says, the endless labyrinth of generic office spaces and boilerplate architecture in general really ebbed my interest immediately. I'm a devotee of elaborate, meticulous background details, lol. Brian Suddenly Old says, webtoon comics use this all the time, but typically the figures are hand-drawn. This is used to meet tight deadlines of weekly pages. Interesting to know. Resistance Publishing. Chuck Dixon is the only reason I spend time and money on Rippaverse. Yeah, well, I mean, after reading Horseman, I wouldn't even put him on that kind of pedestal. I'm going to go ahead and get Zaylan, and I'm definitely going to get the Great War of Separation, and I'll get ALPHACORE too because I want to see where that goes. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not as hopeful anymore. Yeah, the thing about 3D objects in ISOM #2, I mean, there was a good sequence of that, but there was also a bad sequence of that, and it was right at the where Avery is remembering the experience with the kids that he was trying to protect from Shodron, and you'll notice he's at a comic book convention where Shodron has apparently been on a rampage, and there's all of this stuff strewn around, but there are no bodies anywhere. And I'm looking around and I'm like, where are all the dead people? Shouldn't there be corpses here? It's almost like the, Independence Day where you had all the burned out cars, but you had no corpses in any of the cars. I'm looking at this page and I'm like, yeah, I mean, everybody cut and run, but you think Shodron would have gotten at least one more or two more and thrown them around in like various splayed angles or something. The kids mentioned that he killed a cop, and it's like you don't see the cop's body anywhere. You don't see any bodies anywhere. You just see the two kids in there. It's like, did he eat them all? What the hell? You've got this guy who's apparently on a murderous rampage, and what And there's only one murder so far. I mean, I don't that to me was kind of a disappointment because I could kind of tell that probably Cliff Richard had just kind of backed off on that and saying, "Well, he didn't ask for any bodies, so I'm not giving any bodies." And yet, it would have been the thing that made the most sense. Uh, Puma Fist. Did the suckers who paid $5,000 to get cameos in the books ever happen? I don't know. I don't know if that's happened as yet. Karate Stick, Larry Shungite. Yeah, if anybody doesn't know, in ISOM number 2, there's a scene where, for no freaking reason, we cut to this wrestling arena. And these guys are talking about this wrestling league. And the only reason that this thing is even in the book is because so many people asked about the Southern or the Southwest Southern Wrestling League or something like that, that was mentioned at the end of ISOM number 1. And there were, I guess a whole bunch of people wrote in and said, "There's a wrestling league? What is that all about?" And so Eric July actually wrote a scene where one of his characters is watching on TV this big wrestling scene where this guy named Larry Shungite comes out. And of course, there's a splash page where everybody's, cheering as his, startup symbols appear. There's like a hammer and anvil thing going on. And but he's not on the stage yet. So this whole splash page is just kind of wasted on, nobody there. And then he comes out and he spends like half the entire page just getting up to the stage, quiet and all. Nobody's saying anything. And he grabs the microphone and he starts talking about how the title was robbed from him, and how he wants to get the title back from the winner. And then the winner's right about to come out, and then they cut away and they never show you who the winner was. And I'm just like, why am I even watching this? And then the guy's like, "Well, sir, it's time to go. You need to get down to the car." And so they both leave. I'm like, are you kidding me? Where does this even come from? Why did we have that thrown in there for just no freaking reason? And again, who knows? I think at one point Eric July was actually in talks with a pro wrestler to write a wrestling style comic book, and maybe that fell through. But uh, who knows? We may actually see a comic book about Larry Shungite someday. Andrew Rowland, $5. All right, that's $25. We have reached the halfway point. We are at the halfway point to the YAIRA number 2 review. Just need another $25 to get the YAIRA number 2 review. It annoys me to no end that the Rippa stands our only argument for being positive about Rippaverse is the on-time delivery. That doesn't mean good product. Yes, and let me mention something about that in just 1 second. Brian Suddenly Old says, I thought that sequence was some kind of mind fog created by the Hell Monkeys." And what's funny is that there was an edited edition of ISOM number 2 that was done by the guy who's now writing Fearsome for Ethan Van Sciver, and he actually made it into that where Eric July, or no, not Eric July, where Larry Shungite was actually a manifestation of a mind control thing that was attacking ISOM. And that's why there was this whole wrestling motif deal. He was it's like ISOM was watching it on TV and thinking to himself, "Wait, what is he talking to me?" or something like that. Something like that. Fan art exhibit says, "Oh, Brian Suddenly Old mentions it's not Fearsome. Ethan Van Sciver himself is writing Fearsome. It was Elephant, the guy who did the ISOM number 1 edited edition and ISOM number 2 edited edition, both of which are pretty good. If you, I think his name's Jabai or Jabby or something like that, Jabbii. And if you can look up his Substack and look up the ISOM number 1 edited edition and the ISOM number 2 edited edition, both of those are really good. And so from that, Ethan Van Sciver picked him out to write Elephant for him. Yeah, he was going for the low hanging fruit there, but he actually did a real good. Did I time out again? Did I glitch up again? I wonder how hot this thing is getting. It doesn't feel like it's getting warm. Let's see. Fan art exhibit says writing your story around what the audience wants to see says to me you have no actual voice in your work. You're simply responding to what others want. Yes, that is one thing about Eric July is that he is very responsive to his audience. Whatever it is they want to see, he will find a way to give it to them, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. I used to play the MMORPG City of Heroes, and they would take some of the ideas that people asked for just incessantly, and they would do a bang up job of providing those things to people. Like for example, people would complain that my power only comes in this color. I want it to come in any color I want, and so they actually created a character. They upgraded their character creation system at one point where you could pretty much make any power set any color you wanted, and it was amazing. They also said, "Well, I want to be able to go back and play older missions that I missed when my character was leveling up." And I would always dismiss that and think to myself, "Well, just create another character and then go off and play those missions that way." But people really, really wanted the idea or the ability to go back and play the earlier missions, so they actually invented an entire zone in City of Heroes where you could go and time travel back to those missions that you had missed before and play them. And I'm just like, I can't believe they went through all this effort. And then, of course, the one big thing that people were clamoring for all the time, as soon as City of Villains came out, people were saying, oh, and Brian Suddenly Old says, yes, COH was really responsive, and I was part of the beta testing volunteer team on all of that. Yeah, I do miss that game. Uh, and fan art exhibit saying gaming's a little different than comics when it comes to being responsive to the fans, but there's still similarities in there. But what was I going to say? Oh yeah, the major thing that people wanted from City of Heroes as soon as they came out with City of Villains is they wanted to turn some of their heroes into villains so that they could go over to the villain side of things. And they wanted to be able to take their villains and make them into heroes. And eventually, City of Heroes came out with an entire expansion called Going Rogue, where you could take one of your existing heroes through a story arc that would turn him from a hero into a villain. And it took a while to do it, but you could do it. And I was just like, I cannot believe how much they are putting into some of these fan ideas that I just wrote off as being dumb. I was like, just create another character and do the stuff over there. You don't have to bother them for, all their stuff. And of course, the thing that would irritate the hell out of me is how I would have an idea and then people would shit all over it on the forums, even though it was like the easiest thing in the world for them to do. Like my thing on City of Heroes was I hated the fact that on the missions that you would get, the random missions that you would get from people, they were always door missions. There were never any City of Villains missions that were, I want you to, the Luddites are ripping parts out of my used car lot. I want you to take down 10 of the Luddites. And I used to love those missions on City of Heroes because you could just go off and fight a few people and then come back and get some experience points. And people were just hell bent that no such missions would ever be included in City of Villains. Every time I brought it up, and I was just like, I'd really like to have something where I just need to go fight 10 of these guys or fight 10 of those guys and get, a little bit of an idea of who these characters are and all that kind of stuff. People would poo poo that like nobody's business. I never understood why people were so adverse to just having those kinds of missions on there, because to me it was like, all right, if you don't like those kinds of missions, don't do them. They give you an option of picking among 3 missions anyway. Just pick the mission that you want to do. Oh God. But yeah, I played City of Heroes for a long time, and I really wish that game had not closed down. I know they've got private servers up now, but I don't mess with it. One of these days I may get into Star Wars: The Old Republic. or I might get into Star Trek Online, but those are the only games that I'm even really considering. Uh, Brian Suddenly Old says the City of Villains fans were really a different breed. They were PvP focused, player versus player. Yeah, and I never really cared much for the player versus player aspect of City of Heroes. They never really got that stuff all sorted out. I mean, it's kind of hard to do with the kind of system that they had, but um yeah, and the thing about City of Heroes is that they were screwing themselves up towards the end. They did a revamp of Atlas Park, and the revamp was terrible. And they were going to be revamping other zones, and I just knew they were going to be the early portions of City of Heroes were so playable that I used to love creating new characters and just taking them through the basic missions from the first few zones of City of Heroes. And then when you got to the point where you're spreading out into the larger world, I would usually go back and just create a new character because the older missions were the best, practically. Uh, let's see. So where does Rippaverse stand now? Of course, Rippaverse. Oh, well, I think let's see. I was on Gooding, and now Horseman has kind of been a bounce back from the financial disaster that was Gooding. Gooding only made about $500,000, if that. Uh, and now it's looking like YAIRA #2 is only going to hit about what 300,000. So they're having to put forward considerably more. It seems like they're having to put forward more effort in order to sustain their numbers. Because when you think about it, if YAIRA #2 gets $300,000, and YAIRA #1, which was probably twice as long, got 1 point something million dollars. I mean, that's a hell of a drop. And now you have to start creating more comics and more comics just to keep the business afloat. I don't know how long they're going to be able to sustain that, especially if their quality doesn't rise to the challenge. Uh, Acentric said, I played SWTO or played Star Wars: The Old Republic for a few years and went kind of woke. I I don't know. I've only played up through. I started a couple of characters, and then I quit the characters, and then I started another character, and then I've kind of played him up through the point where he's on that world with the Twi'leks that I think it was the Twi'leks that they have to or he's got to find out what terrorist faction or something. But I'm getting bogged down in the side quests, and now I think I've got a side quest that I need help on in order to be able to complete. And I don't know. I mean, I need a new desktop computer before Windows 10 goes out of service. So I do need to upgrade what I've got, but I can't imagine spending a whole lot on a desktop, especially if all I was going to do was play Star Wars on it. I may just decide to I may just decide to give up on just gaming altogether because I don't have the time. And the time that I would spend playing those games. I mean, I'm sure I would enjoy myself, at least up until the point that I got like really frustrated with the games. But I really need to like focus on, number one, making more money, just because I want to retire early. Really, I mean, it's not like I'm hard up, but I'd love to retire early, and um, and just getting more stuff done for the channel. Doing more live streams like this, doing more comic book editing, doing more comic book reviews. I just can't see how I would fit in any game playing when I have all that stuff to do as well. And of course, there's all the stuff that I haven't binge watched yet. Those TV shows are not going to watch themselves. They require a sacrifice of time, and there's only one person who can give it to them, and that's me. Let's see. Dan Elvin said diminishing returns and skyrocketing overhead is never a good combination. That's true. Brian Suddenly Old says YAIRA 2 is already at 242,000 and still has 26 days to go. It might hit 500,000. It's also a shorter book at 56 pages. I always felt that it was really in the first couple of days that they were really going to hit their stride as far as how many books they were going to get. I mean, it does have 26 days to go, which means we've got 26 days to get the remaining $25 that I needed for the YAIRA #2 review. But I don't know. I don't see how this is necessarily sustainable. But I don't know. Like I said, Chris Bacon's probably got the best number sense where it comes to this stuff. Oh goodness. So where are I mean what is the state of things presently? I mean, the state of things presently is that Eric stands to come out with a slew of books in 2025. And this first year of such mass production of books is really going to kind of set a benchmark for what Rippaverse quality is going to look like going forward. Is it going to be the same low quality that we've been experiencing over and over again? Or are things actually going to get better? I would submit that without editorial control, you're not going to see better comics out of them. It's going to depend entirely on the writers who really have no motivation to really put forward their best effort. And what will have to happen at some point is somebody's got to realize, this is there's probably going to be some higher profile fans that just basically say, I like the Rippaverse at first, but honestly, the quality is just not up to snuff. I can see it now and I'm getting out. And then that could potentially start a cascade that brings everybody out. But that's all just kind of spitballing. There's really, as far as predicting what the future holds, and especially, will the inclusion of Gothix really affect things? I don't think so. I mean, he might get her to write some stuff, but she's never even read any comics, so what would she have to write? And who knows? I mean, and I'm not saying that she couldn't turn out to be super talented in that perspective in that area, but why would we naturally think that? I mean, as far as her new role within the company and how does that affect him? Does it really give him what does it actually give him the time to do? And I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to find the time to write all the books that he's committed himself to writing, because he's writing ISOM #3. He's writing Norfolka #1. Or the Norfolka limited series. He's writing Salvage, the end of that series, and he's writing Saoirse, that limited series. And so he's got to make room on his calendar, and so that's the reason why she's there. And give her a break, because she's there to do a job, and the job is to put a positive face on the Rippaverse and deal with the haters, deal with the fans, and she's going to do her job, I'm sure. So I wish her good luck in that. She's got kind of an uphill battle ahead of her, but she's been in the YouTube sphere for some time. It's clear that she's good at public speaking. It's clear that she's good with interacting with customers. So I don't see how she's going to have any real problems going forward. She'll probably just do it till she gets tired of it or finds a better job. Let's see. Fan art exhibit says YAIRA will struggle to hit 400,000. I think Chris Bacon said YAIRA 2 was a complete failure relative to book 1. So far it is. I mean, because book 1 hit about 1.2 million before they did the statue drop that raised everything to 1.5 million. So I would say 1.2 million. Yeah, I mean, it's only making like between a fifth and a sixth of what it made before. I mean, just think about that. I mean, that's like it's a pittance financially, but how many people did not go from YAIRA number 1 to number 2? That's really what I'd love to know. Brian Suddenly Old says Rippaverse is also paying for advertising on YouTube and X and Facebook. From what I've been exposed to, people might click through. Yeah, there's a lot of Facebook advertising out there as well. I'm just being optimistic, even if I am no longer a customer. Fan art exhibit says Gothix would have been a good hire if the company was going well. She's well spoken, charismatic, and is good looking too. Having a pretty face to sell stuff is not a bad idea. And Brian Suddenly Old says Gothix feels like a misstep, or she is not a genuine face, and fans are already noticing. Yeah, well, somebody who's actually been in the comic book business would not be a genuine face either, not being able to really wholeheartedly approve of the Rippaverse quality. So I don't think a genuine face was really an option for Eric July. Uh, I think the genuine face, the most genuine face we've seen out of Rippaverse was the look on his face when I was telling him about the race swap. uh, okay, well, I hope that kind of gives kind of an outline of where things got to with the Rippaverse from its beginnings to here. I mean, I'm sure I left out a ton of stuff, and feel free in the comments to fill in any details that I might have missed, and or if you have any contradictions that you want to load in, or things that I got wrong, or just opinions that you've got, feel free to put those in the comments. And if anybody after the stream wants to donate, just happens to find some money on the ground or something like that, most was that Brian Suddenly Old says most of that stuff is unnecessary drama. Yeah, there's a lot of drama farming. So if you find some money on the ground and you want to send it my way for the YAIRA number 2 collection, we've got $25 in the pot already, and we just need another $25 to get a review of YAIRA number 2 going. And then who knows, we may already have to start drumming up for the next thing. I'm hoping that the things are spaced out well enough where I'm not just, continually asking for money, and I will be buying a lot of these comics that are coming out myself. I mean, when it comes to Norfolka, when it comes to ALPHACORE number 2, when it comes to the Great War of Separation, those are all going to be on my tab. So don't worry, I won't be asking for money on every single book, but there there will be a few, because I'm just like, oh God, I don't know if I just don't see the reason. I just don't see the reason why I should pay for this punishment. I'm going to suffer for your sake. Pony up. Oh gosh. But yeah, $25 towards a review of YAIRA number 2, and then we will see what we will see as far as the rest of the Rippaverse stuff goes. But the Bloodruth number 1 should be on its way in February, which is not too far away. That's only 7-8 days away. And then we'll see whether the Saska sisters write horror any better or worse than they write superheroing type books. You already know that I'm not really confident about that. So thanks to everyone who has been holding on and watching. I hope this provided a generally good history lesson on what all went on with the Rippaverse, and especially from the reader's point of view of how we felt about it at the time. I'm Mike Partika. Oh yes, Brian Suddenly Old says read Alpha Red for a palate cleanser. So let me just go ahead and type that into the search bar so I can start looking for it. Is that on Indiegogo by any chance? Whether that's or is that on a particular website already? Has somebody already published that? Let's see if I can already pull it up just from the comic books here. Let's see, comic. Alpha Red Indie Planet, indieplanet.com. Okay. All right. So I see it here, and I will take a look at that. Oh, Star-Crossed Comics? Is that the company that does it? Let's see, where's Star-Crossed Comics? Star-Crossed Comics. That's on oh, that's a webtoon? No, that's Star-Crossed is the, oh god, I think that's one of those. We won't get into that. Okay, Star-Crossed Comics Alpha Red. Star-Cross Comics. Okay. Not crossed, but cross. There we go. All right, Star-Cross Comics product page. And there it is. All righty. See what we got here. Yeah, Star-Cross is the publisher. All right. Okay, so you heard it here first. Alpha Red from Star-Cross Comics. Yeah, it's just cross, not crossed. Thanks to everyone for sticking around. And I'm Mike Partika. Please do subscribe if you haven't already. And if you find any money, feel free to drop a super thanks after the chat has ended. And we'll get even closer to that $50 goal for YAIRA number 2. And I will talk to you all later.